The underlying charge here is destruction, alteration, and concealment of evidence. And the allegation is that the evidence was human remains of two different people.
Husband and wife Chad and Lori Daybell face felony conspiracy charges in Fremont County, Idaho, in connection with the disappearance and deaths of Lori's children. The remains of 16-year-old Tylee Ryan and 7-year-old JJ Vallow were found on Chad Daybell's property in June after a 9-month extensive search spanning multiple states.
The evidence that has been concealed in this case, it's not simply a document, drugs, a gun. These are human remains.
The Madison County prosecutor alleges that Chad, Lori, and her now deceased brother, Alex Cox, all conspired to, quote, commit the crime of concealing and destroying/altering evidence they knew would be produced, used, or discovered as evidence in a trial. That evidence, the remains of Tylee and JJ.
I would ask the court to take note of paragraphs 39 and 40 and the manner of the concealment of one of those bodies, which the state finds to be particularly egregious.
A conspiracy occurs when two or more people agree to commit a crime and take steps towards accomplishing it. In Idaho, the prosecutor would have to show that Chad, Lori, and Alex Cox all willfully agreed and intended to destroy, alter, or conceal the remains of Tylee and JJ. And then the prosecutor must provide evidence of actions taken by the co-conspirators in furtherance of that crime.
The law in Idaho is parallel to the federal law. That means there must be some overt act for you to be actually actively involved in the conspiracy.
Under Idaho law, the prosecutor can prove an agreement between parties to commit a crime in any manner sufficient to show an understanding of the parties to the agreement. Did Lori, Chad, and Alex Cox orally agree to commit the crime? Or is there written or digital proof they intended to conceal the remains of the children?
Email records, searches on a computer, will lead you to corroborating evidence. It might not be direct evidence, but when you're building a case, it's somewhat like building a house. You start with one brick, one layer at a time, and if you can connect those dots, then you definitely can show that there is an agreement.
Even if the prosecutor does not have evidence of an oral or written agreement, an agreement can still be implied from the conduct of the parties.
Connecting the dots that there was an agreement. This is not a coincidence. This is evidence that they are trying to hide criminal activity.
In this case, the criminal complaints against Chad and Lori outline certain conduct in a list of alleged deceptive actions, including Chad allegedly texting Tammy Daybell about burning debris and burying a dead raccoon in the pet cemetery on September 9th, 2019, the day Tylee Ryan went missing. And Alex Cox allegedly telling Rexburg police that JJ was with his grandma, Kay Woodcock, in Louisiana, while police were conducting a welfare check on JJ's whereabouts. And Lori allegedly falsely informing the Rexburg Police Department that Tylee was attending BYU, Idaho, in Rexburg. Those are among many other alleged actions by the Daybells outlined in court documents concerning the disappearance and deaths of Tylee and JJ.
No crime that's ever been committed is perfect. None of them. There's always some evidence out there that's going to be left there. The burden is on the prosecutor and the state to demonstrate that these two people committed this crime.
It will be up to first a judge and then a jury to determine if, in fact, Chad, Lori, and Alex Cox were all in this together.
Common sense, you look at what happened and you kind of piece it together in your mind. Many of us have been doing that. But then you've got to get inside a courtroom and you've got to prove it. First, probable cause, then beyond any and all reasonable doubt. Not the easiest thing in the world to do. Let's bring in our team of legal journalists with us tonight. Chanley Painter, Court TV legal correspondent, anchor Julie Grant, and Court TV special contributor Ashley Banfield. Chanley, let me start with you. Let's focus in on what you're talking about. Traditionally, the easiest way to prove the conspiracy, you're a former prosecutor too, is you get one of the conspirators to flip and testify for the state, the government, whoever, to kind of take the jury inside that agreement. But here, I don't know if they're going to find any sort of communication or trail of communication amongst these three.
That's a great point. At this point, it's still, like the prosecutor office told me yesterday, quote, early in the investigation. There may be evidence that we're not aware of. The affidavit, while it is lengthy, it's 17 pages long. It focuses on Alex Cox's cell phone movements. What communications did they find on that phone? That wasn't in the affidavit. What about Lori Vallow's phone or Chad Daybell's phone? We hear about this text message to his wife as one of his overt acts that day that Tylee Ryan disappeared. But what else did they find on that phone? Will those answers be made on Monday during the preliminary hearing? Because the prosecutor will have to prove for the conspiracy counts that he and Lori and others like Alex Cox had this agreement. And it has to be, they can use any evidence that's sufficient there, but it has to be enough to where they can show an agreement. And then also those overt acts taken in furtherance of that agreement to commit this crime, which the crime here is concealing the remains of Tylee and JJ.
Yeah, I think the overt acts might be easier than trying to prove that agreement. And I guess one of the ways that they can do it is through, it's sort of implied through their actions. So you don't have an email, you don't have a text message, you don't have a recording, you don't have someone testifying about it, but you look at what they did, when they did it, where they were, and then you can reasonably infer from all of that of course they were agreeing. And I guess that's, at this point, I think that's the way they're going to have to do this.
You're exactly right. That is how the complaint lays out. They're going to take those overt acts in the complaint and in the affidavit, and hopefully first through the judge, through the preliminary hearing, and then to a jury potentially later on, that those acts, the conduct, the behavior was intentional. This goes to prove they knew what they were doing. This was an agreement. Like the expert I interviewed today, Mr. McKinney, he said, this isn't a coincidence that they just happened to lie to the police during a welfare check on where JJ was that day. And then later, 9 months, he's found in Chad Daybell's backyard. So that's the path it seems that this prosecutor will go next week, and then, of course, eventually at a trial.
Yeah, and when he has that trial, keep the engineers off the trial. They like things a little bit cleaner, and this isn't going to be super clean, this one. All right, Ashley, let's talk about Chad Daybell. At some point, he's interviewed and speaks to police. What do we know about communications between Chad Daybell and police? We've heard about Lori to a certain extent, but how about Chad?
Well, for starters, I think they have a whole lot of email between Lori and Chad, and probably Alex as well, and they just haven't said that stuff yet in the affidavits, but I think they've got a boatload of that stuff. I also think if Alex Cox was dumb enough to go to the murder sites and the burial sites with his phone on his hip, he was probably dumb enough to make calls and probably text. And I think Chad himself was dumb enough to text his wife about the pet cemetery, may have been dumb enough to text a few things to Lori as well. But when it comes to Chad, I think it's really important with regard to the conspiracy to go back to those moments when the Woodcocks had been getting stonewalled by Lori, by the way. How about that in furtherance of a conspiracy? Wouldn't let the grandparents speak to the dead children. When they were getting stonewalled, they called the police in Rexburg and they said, please go over there. We need a welfare check. And they did. They went over there and they saw one Chad Daybell and one Alex Cox outside of Lori's unit, number 175. And they said, where's Lori? And Chad pretended not to really know her, even though they were married. Pretended really not to know her. Didn't even know her phone number, actually, even though they were married. And said, I don't know, last time I saw her, I think she was down at, unit 107 down there. That would be Alex Cox's unit. Alex Cox had already moved out of that unit. So he was purposefully evasive to the police about his relationship with Lori, even though they were married. And I think that's a pretty significant little nugget there. And later on, Lori was also being interviewed by them and was also evasive. So all in one time frame, you've got them acting in concert in an unusual way. And I think it's pretty darn powerful stuff, given the fact that those children were dead by then.
Yeah, children missing and you're being evasive, 1 + 1 = 2. I think one of the key witnesses in this entire case is going to be Melanie Gibb, Lori Vallow-Daybell's former really good friend. Julie, I know you've been reading through that complaint. What does the complaint say about Melanie Gibb and how important is she going to be here?
Yes, she's going to be huge, Vinny, in terms of establishing those overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy, right? So both of these defendants, both Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow, reached out to their good friend Melanie Gibb, who was, a follower of Chad's teachings and whatnot, and a good friend of Lori's, and there for the start of the budding romance. And so this is what it's alleged that Lori did, according to the complaint, that she contacted Melanie Gibb by phone and requested her to basically lie to law enforcement. The wording in the complaint, it's requesting, encouraging her to prepare, present false evidence regarding where little JJ was. So pants on fire is what they're alleging with Lori Vallow, that she called her good friend and said, lie to police when they talk to you about where my JJ is. And then Chad, he requested that she not cooperate with police, that she not talk to police. Around November 26th, it's alleged that he contacted her by using a phone and essentially requested non-cooperation with law enforcement's lawful investigation regarding JJ's whereabouts. So again, pants on fire, and these are overt acts that go to that conspiracy. And, overt acts don't have to be illegal either. It's just a step taken. You just need that specific intent. So say, for example, those text messages to Tammy Daybell, right? It's not illegal to send a text message, and it's pants on fire. He's lying about the raccoons and the pet cemetery and the burial, all of that. That's an overt act. And the really cool thing about conspiracy is you don't have to show completion when you're a prosecutor. You just have to show that there was this agreement and there was a step taken in furtherance of it with specific intent, and you've got yourself a conspiracy charge. And what's really great is when you do have completion, like in this case, and what's alleged against Mr. Doomsday, you have both the charges itself, the concealment, destruction, the alteration of evidence, those charges pertaining to JJ and Ty Lee, so 2 right there. And then you've got 2 more for the conspiracy charges pertaining to each of those children and their bodies and the folks he is said to conspire with. Cult Mom, Alex Cox, and who knows, maybe some others, Vinny. So I think in terms of proving the conspiracy, these prosecutors are in a very good shape going into this prelim on Monday.
Yeah, and for those of you wondering at home, yes, Julie Grant, former prosecutor as well. Well stated.
She's good.
Chanley,
She is good.
is there going to be
Thank you,
any
my
other
friend.
evidence here?
You're all too kind.
Yeah, so there's a couple other overt acts. Let's talk about Alex Cox. Yes, he is deceased, but he's named in this affidavit. There are acts listed under his name, including him lying to the Rexburg police. That day they did the welfare check back in November 26th. He said that JJ was with his grandparents in Louisiana. That was false, according to the police, and now we know, of course, it is. And of course, they also cite that Lori refused to comply with an order to produce her children. That happened earlier this year. There was an order in a child protection case that she had to comply with. She didn't comply with while she was in Hawaii. So they're also citing that as one of the overt acts in her category. It's also interesting, one more thing, that the overt acts for JJ's counts and Tylee's counts are different. There's a little more for JJ's counts because of Melanie Gibb than Tylee, but it's also important to note, to add to what Julie was saying, it only takes one overt act by the defendant. There doesn't have to be multiple, only one in furtherance of the crime, and that's enough for the prosecutor.
Hey, Vinny,
And again,
I
folks,
just realized
it all begins.
there's one
Yes.
more. I completely forgot. Lori Vallow called the kid's school and said, I'm going to homeschool JJ. That boy was already dead. That sounds like a cover-up to me.
Absolutely. Look at this. We got a team of prosecutors tonight. This is incredible. We are ready. Monday noon, our coverage begins here on Court TV. Do not miss it. Chanley, Julie, Ashley, thank you so much. We'll be speaking again.